Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho! Ha ha ha!
Chucky's introduction is one of the best in slasher cinema. The first scene in the franchise opens mid-gunfight and it concludes with a serial killer transferring his soul into a doll before blowing up a toy store with the power of voodoo. What more could you ask for? Chucky went on to deliver a slew of memorable kills. He's blown people up, beaten them to death with a ruler, crushed them in a garbage compactor, smothered them, melted them, electrocuted them, and decapitated them.
Sometimes I scare myself.
And that's before we even got to the TV series, which averages about 3 kills per episode. This guy just loves killing. In the first movie, he had a pretty straightforward goal. His partner in crime abandoned him, and Detective Norris mortally wounded him, so Chucky was out for revenge.
I'm gonna get you! And I'm gonna get Eddie! No matter what!
Oh, he means it. Since then, Chucky's priorities have gotten a little more obscure. For the first few movies, he tries to transfer his soul into a kid. Then he tries to recover his voodoo amulet so he could transfer his soul into Katherine Heigl's boyfriend. After that, he tries to raise a family?
Now we really will be the perfect family.
And that was pretty weird, but for the most part, the franchise has got a pretty great track record. It's one of the only 80s franchises to survive this long without needing a reboot to keep it going. I mean, they did make a reboot, but when you consider that literally every other Chucky movie before or since was written, produced, and starring these 3 guys, it's hard to even really call the remake a Chucky movie. So we're gonna skip over that one and instead just dive into the real Chucky movies. The production, the stories, and all the fun stuff our favorite redhead serial killer has gotten up to along the way.
Like and subscribe.
Chucky all started in the mind of Don Mancini, co-writer of the original script and every subsequent movie. He's even directed a few of them. With a dad working in consumer marketing, Mancini had a unique insight into how people could be manipulated into buying things. He was especially interested in how things were marketed towards kids, which was incredibly lucrative in the 80s due to some changes in the FCC. The change in regulation made it possible for companies to start producing children's cartoons that were little more than commercials for new toys.
Good guys say 3 different sentences. We even turn our heads and blink our eyes when you talk to us. Right, Oscar?
Hi, I'm Oscar, and I'm your friend to the end. Wow!
Through his father, Mancini learned at a young age that ad agencies were referring to children as consumer trainees. And that term stuck with him through to college, where he was compelled to write a dark, cynical satire about toy marketing. At the time, dolls like Cabbage Patch Kids were all the rage. People freaking love these things.
When the doors opened at this Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania store, the pushing and shoving began. One woman was knocked to the floor and suffered a broken leg.
So Mancini put together a script called Blood Buddy that was all about this kid named Andy and his relationship with a doll he got for his birthday. What was special about this doll was that it could bleed. You know, like the ones that could blink or wet themselves. Man, the 80s were weird. If the Buddy doll got a scrape, he'd bleed, and he'd have to go out and buy some good guy bandages to fix him up. At some point in the script, Andy decides to slice his hand open to mix his blood with the doll's and make them soulmates.
And I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho! Ha ha ha!
So, obviously the doll came alive, because this was the 80s, and anything could come alive if you bled on it or it was struck by lightning. Buddy would sneak around at night to kill Andy's babysitter or his teacher or anyone that Andy didn't like. He was a sad little weirdo going through a stressful time, and the doll represented his repressed anger at his situation. It's not a bad idea, but it's not the Chucky we know and love. Producer David Kirshner was in the market for a killer doll story, and when he bought the rights is when the story took its first turn. He got in touch with director Tom Holland for the project, and they both decided the story should focus more on Chucky and less on Andy's childhood angst. This is where you would normally want to rage at the studio for meddling with the story of a talented young writer, but these guys really shaped Chucky into what he is today, so it's hard to be mad at them. Holland scrapped the blood-packed idea and decided to open the movie with the voodoo ritual. There's something else that got changed here, but blink and you'll miss it. See that? Right there. He's throwing away a dress. That's the only remnant of a deleted scene in which Detective Norris disguised himself as a woman to stalk the Lakeshore Strangler. They shot the whole scene and thankfully they deleted it. Could you imagine if instead of starting mid-chase with the big explosion, the movie started with this goofy cross-dressing detective tailing a creepy guy in a trench coat?
Hey baby, you looking for a party?
That scene was a part of a nearly 2.5-hour long cut of the film that test audiences first saw. In the end, the movie got edited down to a riveting 88 minutes, and all traces of the original cut have been lost to history. Besides just his edits with the story, Tom Holland brought along with him 2 actors he'd recently worked with. We got Chris Sarandon as Detective Mike Norris, who was the villain in Holland's movie Fright Night, and Brad Dourif, who played a thug in Holland's movie Fatal Beauty. In Fatal Beauty, he plays a thug who has this big shootout with a detective in a department store before limping away and eventually getting shot down. Sound familiar? In the first cut of the film, Dourif's only contribution was the opening scene, and the doll's voice was performed by Jessica Walter. Yeah, there's a cut of the movie, one that none of us will ever see, where Jessica Walter plays the voice of Chucky.
Here's some money, go see a Star War.
And as fun as that sounds, nobody liked the final result.
There was a whole cut of the movie, and it's really funny because Chucky sounds gay.
So they brought Dourif back to dub over Chucky, and in every subsequent movie, he's recorded all of Chucky's lines before the first day of shooting. Dourif is only one half of the character, though. The design of the doll itself is basically a parody of the My Buddy doll, though Mancini claims his influence here was only subconscious.
My buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy. Wherever I go, he goes. My buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy, my buddy and me.
That's gonna be stuck in your head all day now. In the original script, Chucky was even named Buddy, but that didn't stick for obvious copyright reasons. The final version was a mishmash of some other popular dolls. Howdy Doody was a big influence, but another big one was Chatty Cathy, the original talking doll.
Sure, 'cause a dog can talk or something. Please brush my hair.
Mancini wasn't the first person to think talking dolls were creepy, because Chatty Cathy inspired an evil doll named Talkie Tina for an episode of The Twilight Zone, and in a clever nod, they got the same voice actress for both.
My name is Talkie Tina, and you'll be sorry.
Then there's Corky, who was the kid brother of another doll named Cricket, and of all three dolls, Corky looks like the most fun to hang out with.
How about circus ringmasters? Or race car drivers?
If his voice sounds familiar, it's because he also does Chucky's doll voice in the movie.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Don Mancini mixed all these ideas together in his head and came up with some character concept sketches for Kevin Yeager, who designed and manipulated the Chucky doll on set for the first 4 movies. Yeager's probably most well known for creating Chucky, but he also did special effects for some of the first few Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Trick or Treat, Sleepy Hollow, and he even designed the Crypt Keeper. Not a bad legacy. At any given moment, they had about 8 different puppeteers animating Chucky. One person would be in charge of his jaw and lips, another would take care of his cheeks, another just for his eyebrows, someone would control his whole body movement, and more complicated shots would need more people to articulate his legs, arms, and fingers. With rare exceptions like E.T. or this bird from Mary Poppins, sophisticated animatronics were pretty much only seen at Disneyland, so Yeager and his team were really exploring new territory.
Hi! It's me, Chucky. What do you think?
After letting Andy down by buying him pants for his birthday, his mom, played by Catherine Hicks, is desperate to get her hands on a good guy doll, which she eventually does by way of this back alley peddler. This might seem like a crazy thing to do these days, but remember, people were crazy for dolls in the 80s. The next day, Chucky tricks Andy into ditching school, hopping on the L, and then wandering into a junkyard next to what looks like a crack den. Man, this kid just does what he's told. Remember, there's just one thing on Chucky's mind.
I'm gonna get you, and I'm gonna get Eddie, no matter what!
And boy does he get Eddie. Eddie doesn't really have any lines in the movie, and he doesn't come up again in the franchise for another 30 years, but the character is finally given a little respect in the TV series, where we learn he's been manipulated by Chucky since he was a kid. After Eddie's death, we get a few scenes with Andy's mom and a psychologist questioning him about what he was up to, but Andy sticks to his story.
Please say something. Come on, Chucky, say something.
Say something, I'm giving up on you.
With Eddie out of the picture, Chucky goes after Detective Norris, and he almost kills him just before he gets blasted by Norris's Smith & Wesson. And even though he's made of plastic, it hurts.
Last night I got shot. You know something? It hurt. It hurt like a son of a bitch, it even bled.
Which is where one of the coolest design ideas for Chucky comes into play. When he goes to visit the witch doctor who taught him the power of voodoo, he's told that the more time he spends in the doll body, the more human he'll become. So the good guy who starts out like a My Buddy knockoff slowly transforms into basically Jack Nicholson from The Shining.
Here's Johnny!
The only way Chucky can get his soul out of the doll is to perform another soul transfer into the first person he revealed himself to, which was poor little Andy Barkley. The voodoo spell Chucky tries to cast whenever he gets Andy alone starts out,
Ade Dewey Dembella. Give me the power, I beg of you!
Damballa is an actual figure in Haitian voodoo, although he's basically analogous to God in that belief structure, far from the pure evil being that he represents in the Chucky franchise. This revelation leads Chucky to track Andy down where he, his mom, and Detective Norris all confront him. If you thought Chucky looked a little bit off for this final scene, like he was too thick or something, what you're noticing are the shots where actor and Howard the Duck megastar Ed Gale played the role of Chucky. He stuck around for 2 more Chucky movies, and he's credited as Chucky's stunt double, which is pretty hilarious. He shows up whenever Chucky has to do something that was just technically impossible for Yeager and his team to pull off. but his biggest commitment to the role was when he had to get set on fire.
We're friends to the end, remember?
This is the end, friend.
Gale wasn't quite as small as the doll, so whenever he's on the screen here at the end, he was being shot on a set of the living room that was made 30% bigger than the set with all the other actors. The proportions are a little off, but otherwise the effort the crew put in really sells it and makes this final showdown one of the most memorable horror sequences of the 80s.
Hello, Andy.
Child's Play came out on November 9th, 1988, a day after the movie takes place. It opened #1 at the box office and made back 4 times its $9 million budget.
Even the critics love my work and they never like anything. Roger Ebert of the New York Daily News says I'm one mean SOB and he ain't kidding.
And what happens to successful movies? They get sequels, so Mancini got to work writing the next installment. MGM and United Artists had just learned that they were about to be bought out by an Australian financial company, and because that company only wanted to produce family-friendly content, Child's Play 2 was never going to happen. Instead of letting the promising young franchise fall apart, Kirshner was given the rights for future installments by the CEO of United Artists himself, Dick Berger. I bet that guy had a rough childhood. This weird little legal exchange is how United Artists was able to produce a remake of the first movie in 2019, while Mancini and Kirshner were still busy working on sequels, which Mancini said felt like a slap in the face. In the meantime, Kirshner decided to produce the sequel as an independent project, which caused a bidding war to break out between nearly every major studio. Then, as with most successful films of the late 80s and early 90s, Steven Spielberg got involved. Spielberg knew Kirshner from working together on An American Tail, and he was friends with the head of Universal. The head of Universal, Sid Sheinberg, asked Spielberg to try and convince Kirshner to take the movie to Universal. And when Steven Spielberg suggests you do something, you do it. Subsequently, Spielberg also owns a piece of Chucky.
Fucking Chucky!
Kirshner teamed up again with Don Mancini and John Lafia for the sequel. Lafia had co-written the final script for the first movie with Mancini, but this time he took the role of director and left the sole writing credit to Mancini. With the gang back together and Universal producing, the sequel moved forward. Presenting Child's Play 2, Judgment Day. The story of a young boy whose mother was sent to an insane asylum for being associated with multiple murders. The boy gets sent to live with a pair of helpless foster parents, but eventually leaves them to team up with an older female family member to defeat an immortal machine by hiding in a factory and melting it to death in a pool of molten liquid. Oh wait, sorry, I'm reading the wrong script. Here it is.
Sorry, Jack. Chucky's back.
Child's Play 2 kicks off with the first of many awesome opening title sequences in the franchise, and this one is easily the best. This movie was originally going to open with a courtroom scene that would have shown Catherine Hicks and Chris Sarandon reprising their roles. The scene was going to show Andy's mom getting sentenced to a psychiatric ward because Detective Norris refused to support any of her claims about the murders in the first movie. The scene later got repurposed with some of the details changed for Curse of Chucky 23 years later. There's also a little hint in Curse of Chucky that maybe Karen forgave Detective Mike for not corroborating her story and that they're in a relationship now.
How's Mike doing? I'll tell him I said hello.
But that theory's up for debate. The courtroom scene was apparently cut for budgetary reasons, and it all got summed up in this one line during the opening credits.
The police were smart. They denied everything, which is fine because now they can't hurt us, but the mother's a different matter. She backed up her boy's story in court, so now she's under psychiatric observation.
Considering that the first movie made over $40 million against its $12 million budget, it's surprising that Universal didn't give them any more money this time around. The courtroom scene was also going to have a shot where Chucky is removed from an evidence locker next to the masks of Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. That cheeky little idea did eventually find its way into The Bride of Chucky 2 movies later. Because this scene got cut, the runtime for the movie ends up being barely an hour and 20 minutes long, including the credits. When Chucky's no longer needed as evidence, he's given back to the Play Pals company where they clean him up real nice so they can prove to stockholders that the doll isn't defective and that woman was just crazy. But it doesn't go as planned. When we meet up with Andy again, we find out he's been sent off to live in the foster care system where he has to recount his unbelievable story to a psychiatrist that clearly doesn't believe him. For what it's worth, therapy does seem to be helping poor little Andy.
You know, dreams can't hurt you. Dreams aren't real. Right?
Right.
The idea to put him in foster care was something Kirshner had suggested to Mancini early on for the sequel, and it becomes what the whole core of the story is this time around. In the background of the first movie was a message about the dangers of fanatical consumerism, and this time the story centers around Andy's struggle to be part of a family. These movies don't really need to be anything more than awesome special effects driven murder fests, but Mancini writing in actual themes for each one of them is something you don't always get in slasher movies.
Amazing, isn't it?
So Andy gets adopted by this lovely couple who order a kid like they do fast food. Seriously, they show up at the adoption agency and this lady here says, "Here, take this one," and they do. When he gets home, he meets his older adopted sibling Kyle, and she's... Meanwhile, our pal Chucky has rifled through some of the court cases about his exploits in the first movie, and he tracks Andy down again. For the next half hour of the movie, Kyle distills the idea in Andy that he shouldn't get comfortable because foster families don't last long. And Andy's new parents argue about whether or not they can handle a kid who breaks family heirlooms, is into BDSM, and is suspiciously connected to his teacher's murder. Eventually, Andy snaps, and he goes down into the basement to kill Chucky with his electric knife that every family had in the 90s. But that doesn't work. Chucky kills Andy's foster dad, and Andy gets sent back to the adoption agency to terrorize someone else with his misfortune. From there, both Kyle and Andy get kidnapped by Chucky at separate times, and together they end up trying to kill Chucky in the same factory where he was brought back to life. And if the references to The Shining in the first movie were too subtle for anyone, this time Mancini made sure to get it across by setting the final act in a maze of good guy dolls. Chucky chases Andy and Kyle on some murderous conveyor belts, because apparently this warehouse has no doors, and eventually he gets himself a shiny new hand. But they send him into a doll-making machine which turns him into this monstrosity before Kyle blows Chucky up in what Mancini says is a reference to The Fury. But let's be honest, we were all thinking of Big Trouble in Little China during this scene. Then the movie just ends, like immediately.
Where are we going? Home. Where's home?
Andy, I have no idea.
I haven't seen a movie end this abruptly since Blood Debts in 1983. Chucky was an instant icon, and before the second movie was even out, he was introducing at the Horror Hall of Fame Awards alongside Freddy himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chucky!
When Child's Play 2 was released, exactly 2 years after the first movie, it landed at number 1 at the box office. It didn't quite make as much money as the first movie did, but it still nearly quadrupled its budget worldwide. This time around, though, critics didn't really care for it. It was accused of retreading the same ground as the first movie and being a nasty little slasher flick. Andy and Kyle are pretty much the only ones you care about this time around, and everyone else is pretty much just murder fodder. I guess that wasn't enough for most critics, but according to Mancini himself, and I don't know, the Lamphouse, Child's Play 2 is one of the best movies in the franchise. Andy deciding to arm himself and fight his own battles was a great progression of his character, and we get more Chucky straight out of the gate. What's not to love? Before Child's Play 2 was even done being edited, Universal had Mancini get to work writing a third installment to be ready to hit screens in less than 9 months. They got what they wanted, but the deadline was stressful, resulting in what Mancini says is his least favorite film in the franchise. The movie opens 8 years after the last one in the dusty Play Pals factory where Chucky was... I guess murdered is the right word? As he's dragged across a vat of gooey plastic, some of his inexplicably still fresh blood drips in, swirling into the new batch. Bringing Chucky back to life by mixing his corpse with a vat of plastic was Mancini's plan even before he knew if there would be another movie or not. In an alternate version for the end of Child's Play 2, we get to watch as Chucky gets liquefied and resurrected. The idea of Chucky's blood dribbling into the plastic used to make the dolls was going to be a really cool origin story for as many as 12 Chucky clones in the movie. But Universal nixed the idea because of how much it would cost to produce, so we had to wait about 15 years for that little idea to come to fruition in Cult of Chucky. With the army of Chucky's plan out of the question, Mancini wrote a script that opens with Chucky murdering the PlayPal CEO and using his computer to track Andy down yet again. At this point, Mancini knew he was basically repeating himself, but he wasn't really given the time or the budget to come up with anything else. So Chucky somehow puts himself back in his box, seals it up, slaps a packing sticker on it, and gets himself mailed to the military academy Andy's living at. If the first two movies weren't ridiculous enough, this is the movie where you really need to start suspending your belief to buy into what's happening. It's Child's Play 3 where humor really starts creeping into the franchise.
Nothing like a strangulation to get the circulation going.
At the academy, we meet a bunch of pretty forgettable stock characters. There's this ex-military principal type guy, the drill instructor bully type guy, a kid who's always playing video games, the nerdy Jewish kid everyone picks on, and this girl who's really tough even though, get this, she's really pretty. One character that stands out, even though he's kind of ridiculous too, is the school's barber, who's played by the dad from Hellraiser, and he's just obsessed with shaving heads.
When's the last time you had a trim?
2 weeks ago, Sergeant.
You think? You think? I want to see you right after breakfast. You got it?
Yes, sir, Sergeant Botnick, sir.
The first two movies had a couple great relationships, like Andy and his mom, or Andy and Kyle. So when Chucky shows up to start killing, it really feels like there's something at stake. In Child's Play 3, Andy doesn't really develop a relationship with anyone. Besides Kristen, but it sucks.
Nothing scares you, does it? No.
And the only character with an arc is Whitehurst. If there is a heart to Child's Play 3, it's about coping with trauma. After all these years of trying to put Chucky behind him, Andy has to relive his past and help this young kid not to make the same mistakes. If Mancini had been given a reasonable amount of time, this idea could have been developed better. Meanwhile, Chucky runs around killing people, and the creativity of the kills is really the only thing this installment has going for it.
Presto. You're dead.
Until a memorable part of Child's Play 3 is the finale, which is where every Chucky movie shines brightest, with each one being bigger than the last. The first movie ends with a battle in an apartment living room. The second one's in a warehouse, and the third takes place in this massive carnival in the middle of a forest next to a military academy. Because, why not? Chucky, Andy, Andy's new girlfriend, and the young Chucky-to-be, Tyler, all end up in this crazy Devil's Lair ride, and the whole sequence is just awesome. This whole set piece looks really great and really brings some excitement to the big finale. Andy shoots Chucky through the heart because that's supposed to be the only way to kill him.
His heart is almost human. It's the only way through the heart.
But it doesn't work. A lot of cool stuff happens though. We got Chucky on a pile of skulls, Chucky getting his face sliced off, falls through a bunch of fan blades, and evil is defeated yet again. It doesn't make any sense that they all end up on this carnival ride and that no one else saw them, but how awesome this whole sequence is makes it okay. That's the kind of trap Mancini had written himself into. Basically, for Chucky to still be a threat to adult characters, some really illogical stuff has to happen, so we end up with kills that are just silly.
Oh, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
I personally find it hard to resist those absurd, increasingly silly situations for Chucky to be in, which is why we then got to Bride of Chucky.
7 years after Child's Play 3's disappointing box office return, Bride of Chucky came out and totally reinvented the franchise. Kirshner and Mancini wanted to take Chucky to a new level, and the comedy-flavored meta-commentary that was really big for horror in the late 90s gave them a great opportunity.
Why does that look so familiar?
Mancini drew inspiration from Kevin Williamson's revolutionary script for Scream, which he credits for breathing life back into the slasher genre in general. But the seed of the idea for this movie came from one of David Kirshner's trips to the video store. He came across a copy of The Bride of Frankenstein and thought the idea of Chucky having a bride would be pretty funny. The Bride of Frankenstein turns the terrifying monsters of Frankenstein into a likable comedic star of his own movie.
Good, good.
Fans were already cheering for Chucky, so taking the Bride of Frankenstein approach of focusing way more on the lives of the monsters than the human characters was obviously a good move.
Don't you see? We belong dead.
We belong dead.
When Chucky comes back alive this time, he's got this awesome new stitched together look. Another Frankenstein reference, and this has always been the iconic Chucky look to me. Maybe that's just because Bride is the first Chucky movie I saw, and I'd always see his face staring at me when I went to the video store. His radical change in physical appearance also clues the audience in on this being a brand new over-the-top Chucky franchise now. And we should just think of the first 3 movies as a prologue to this new character.
So how did you end up like this?
Well, it's a long story. In fact, if it was a movie, it would take 3 or 4 sequels just to do it justice.
Bride of Chucky is also a huge departure visually from the other movies in the franchise. Because the concept for the movie is so bizarre, even for a Chucky movie, Kirshner and Mancini decided the best approach would be to make the movie especially stylized. If they could find someone to make the movie look otherworldly, then the absurdity of the story would be easier for audiences to accept. It's the same mentality behind animation. 2-dimensional singing lines just make sense. If you try to make them look grounded and realistic, then your whole movie's gonna have a tone problem. That's where Ronnie Yu comes in. After seeing his film The Bride with White Hair, Mancini and Kirshner were determined to get him to direct Bride. The film was very uniquely stylized and had the right blend of horror, comedy, and drama that the Chucky creators were looking for. They sent him the script, and Yu liked the weird romance and comedy in it, but what really sold him on the project was that Kirshner and Mancini were offering him total creative control to make his interpretation of the movie. Yu brought with him his frequent collaborators, cinematographer Peter Pao and editor David Wu, who together are responsible for his signature look. Just as a side note, Yu's work on Bride of Chucky is what got him the directing job on Freddy vs. Jason 5 years later. The thing that makes this movie really work is the dynamic between Chucky and Tiffany. Jennifer Tilly was always Mancini's first choice for Tiffany. He never thought they'd get her for the movie, but he wrote all of Tiffany's dialogue with Tilly's signature voice in mind.
Well, I heard you working in here, and I was just wondering if you'd like a cup of coffee.
Tilly, however, wasn't interested. At this point in her career, she'd already starred in Bound, the Wachowskis' critically acclaimed directorial debut, and she'd gotten an Oscar nomination for the Woody Allen film Bullets Over Broadway. She was at the height of her career, and the idea of signing on to play a doll in the 4th movie of a horror franchise was downright insulting. Luckily, she thought the script was funny and she was excited about the opportunity to work with the acclaimed director. Offering her a boatload of money only sweetened the deal. This time, Chucky comes back by being Frankenstein back together and resurrected via a spell from a Voodoo for Dummies book that Tiffany owns. Remember these books? Blank for Dummies? Before Google, these books were the most popular way to learn about any particular niche subject, and they were so popular that they became sort of a pop culture joke. I think that's what Mancini was trying to get across early on in this movie by using this book here. In Child's Play 3, Chucky didn't die when he was shot through the heart, so the voodoo continuity was broken. And here in Bride, the voodoo element is a full-on joke. Mancini always thought the voodoo element that got added to his original script was kind of ridiculous.
Why not make voodoo dolls of all your victims? And it's probably, I don't know, maybe an occupational hazard. Probably best not to think about it too much, but I find it kind of hilarious.
So he's letting the audience know right off the bat that he's not taking Chucky's origins seriously anymore. The doll's alive, and that's all we need to know. After Chucky gets resurrected, he and Tiffany have a little fight about who loves who, which results in Chucky murdering her and transferring her soul into the doll she was using to tease him. Instead of finding some kid to tell their secret to, this time around Chucky's plan is to take these two star-crossed idiots hostage and force them to drive him and Tiffany across the country to recover the voodoo amulet that he was wearing when he was killed. Using the power of the amulet, he can place his and Tiffany's souls into the bodies of their hostages and finally get out of his doll body. I say star-crossed because these two hostages, Jade and Jesse, have some pretty direct parallels to Romeo and Juliet. Their families won't allow them to see each other, and the pair decide to elope to escape them. Their whole relationship is cliche and cheesy, but unlike the relationship between Andy and Kristen in Child's Play 3, this one was intentionally melodramatic. Plus, all of these scenes really benefit from Chucky and Tiffany's commentary.
Oh, that's so romantic.
I give him 6 months. 3 if she gains weight.
Bride of Chucky is Mancini's parody of romantic comedies, and it checks all the boxes from the young hopeless romantic couple, to Tiffany and Chucky not getting along at first, all the way down to the soft-focused candlelit love scene that shows genre-appropriate tasteful amounts of butt crack. This came out 6 years before Team America, by the way. The film was a huge hit and made back twice its $25 million budget at the box office. And though critically it did no better than the previous entry in the series, the movie is still a fan favorite.
My favorite of the series.
After Bride of Frankenstein came Son of Frankenstein, so that seemed like the natural path for Chucky. 2 days after the successful release of Bride of Chucky, Mancini got to work writing a movie that was then called Son of Chucky. Unfortunately, Universal didn't want to produce his finished script. They said, and I quote, "This is too gay." So the franchise was shelved until 6 years later when one of Universal's subsidiaries, Rogue Pictures, picked it up for distribution. And the fans are pretty split on this one. Mancini took a risk putting Chucky in a parody of romantic comedies, but fans loved Bride of Chucky, so he tried to bottle lightning twice by putting Chucky, Tiffany, and their new child together in a parody of a family drama.
We have a problem with killing.
I don't have a problem with killing. I like a little killing now and then. What's wrong with that?
A lot of people still get murdered in this one, and I especially like the scene where Chucky and Tiffany remember what it is they loved about each other while they kill this guy. But this movie is way more of a comedy than any other movie in the franchise, and the change in tone was not well received. Chucky and Tiffany died at the end of the last movie, of course, but Mancini decided to give them new bodies in a real meta way, a la Wes Craven's New Nightmare, by having them star alongside Jennifer Tilly playing Jennifer Tilly in an in-universe Chucky movie franchise that also features Jennifer Tilly playing a character named Tiffany.
Tiff? Have we met?
Mancini said he just loved Tilly's performance in Bride so much, and she's such a queer icon, that he really just wanted to get her back on the screen.
What's so funny? It's perfect. It's just what I need to reinvent myself.
She's joined by fictional versions of both the gay icon John Waters and the Grammy-winning rapper Redman. Redman seems a little out of place here, but it was the early 2000s and studios were inserting famous rappers into a lot of horror movies to try and appeal to a larger audience. Which is why we ended up with things like this.
Let's see what you got.
Originally, Mancini tried to get Tarantino for Redman's part. He wrote Tarantino a letter guaranteeing him a lot of makeout sessions with Jennifer Tilly, to get murdered by Chucky in a real creative way, and that the score was going to be by Pino Donaggio, who'd scored several of Brian De Palma's movies, including Tarantino's favorite.
Brian De Palma's Blowout. I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. It's Brian De Palma's finest film.
And it wasn't too crazy to think Tarantino might have accepted the role, because at the time he was still doing some acting.
You make the Lord very nervous.
Anyway, it didn't happen. The other newcomer in this movie is the titular character Glenn. Or is it Glenda? Anyway, voiced by Billy Boyd.
It ain't even anatomically correct.
Don't laugh. It's a serious condition.
Who gets their name from the Ed Wood movie Glenn or Glenda, which was loosely inspired by the gender-affirming surgery of trans actress Christine Jorgensen.
Sometimes I feel like a boy. Sometimes I feel like a girl.
The character itself was a tribute to Psycho, where the titular character has a sweet and docile male personality and a murderous female one. Beyond just the question of Glenn/Glenda's sexuality, Mancini wrote a climax to the movie that's a multi-layered metaphor for sex-affirming surgery. Throughout all the movies, Chucky has been trapped in a body that didn't represent who he really was inside, so the trans metaphor lends itself pretty well. In the movie, Tiffany decides to hide her soul inside of the sexy Jennifer Tilly, and Chucky would join her in the body of her limo driver, which leaves the couple with the problem of their child. They want Glenn/Glenda to have a human body too, but there aren't any spare babies lying around, so Tiffany decides
The only sensible option is a surrogate mother.
Which sets up this whole artificial insemination subplot that plays throughout the movie, which is another acknowledgement of homosexual parenthood, and just not something you'd expect to see in a Chucky movie. Mancini himself is gay, and there's a long lineage of campy horror movies being embraced by the LGBT community. But Mancini should have known that plucking his character out of the slasher genre and repurposing him for commentary on the spectrum of sexuality would alienate a lot of Chucky lovers. Like, imagine if the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie was just super gay. Seed of Chucky is just really gay and funny, and had very little to do with why people love Chucky. Maybe if I'd never seen another Chucky movie, I'd like this movie for what it is, but me, along with thousands of other horror-loving Chucky fans, kind of felt Mancini had turned his back on us.
I have had it! That's it! There is a limit to how much I can take!
This movie made back twice its budget, which was pretty good return at the time because studios could still make a second round of profits with DVD sales, but because of the fan backlash, the franchise had lost momentum and it looked like Seed of Chucky would be the weird note it ended on. After 9 long years of being in development hell, Mancini brought Chucky back with Curse of Chucky, and it's still a little gay.
Hey, lesbos.
Remember when I said it's a brand new franchise now? Well, that total overhaul of the series only lasted for 2 movies, because Curse of Chucky takes us firmly back into the horror genre the series started in. It's a sort of tonal reboot.
Chucky, I'm scared.
You fucking should be.
This movie doesn't retcon any of the previous ones. We see Nika looking up the events of the movies online, and Father Frank recognizes a good guy doll when he sees one.
You know, that doll, it looks really familiar somehow. I seem to remember seeing them on the news.
But it does reintroduce Chucky as a serious killer, which is a huge departure from Seed and Bride, where he was a lot more funny than scary. After the series went completely off the rails with those 2 movies, Mancini brought back the slow burn terror of the first movie by starting off with a dead body that leaves the characters wondering what's going on. And the movie's got all the other classic scary Chucky stuff we love too. There's shots of Chucky moving without being seen.
You found him.
He was in the bathroom.
Really?
His creepy doll voice.
Hey, wanna play?
Missing butcher knives, and Chucky sharing his secret with a child. It could be because I wasn't expecting to ever get a good Chucky movie again after Seed of Chucky, but all things considered, this one really delivers. It's not a movie about Chucky getting married, or offering meta-commentary on the state of slashers, or dealing with gender politics. He's just back to doing what he does best. Killing folks. And he's got that same old sardonic laugh you know and love. Chucky looks a little different in this one. His skin seems like it's made out of a different kind of rubber, his cheeks are a little chubbier, and he doesn't have any of those now iconic stitches on his face. Oh, there we go. When Chucky's old wounds from Child's Play 3 are revealed, we learn this is indeed the Chucky we've been watching for the whole series, and it's awesome. The reason he looks so different is that Kevin Yeager didn't show up for this movie. He'd actually left the series on the last movie, but the change in designers wasn't really noticeable until Curse. Yeager didn't leave the project because he'd fallen out of love with Chucky. Rogue Pictures just didn't offer him a budget worthy of his talents, and they refused to fly any of his team out to Romania when shooting started. So he opted out of work on the movie. This time, Chucky was designed and animated by Tony Gardner, who's held the position in every subsequent movie as well as the TV series. Gardner was no rookie when he signed on to Seed of Chucky. Before Seed, he'd worked on The Blob, Army of Darkness, and Hocus Pocus, just to name a few. So even though the Chucky series lost Kevin Yeager, it was still in good hands. Until Chucky is revealed to be the same little bastard we know and love, it looked like the movie was going to be all totally new characters. And they're all basically just stock characters. There's the alcoholic priest, the controlling mother, the mean older sister, etc. But they make up for being kind of basic by dying one by one until we're left with the movie's star, Nika. You know how the last movie was all about Chucky's son? Well, this one's kind of about his daughter, Fiona Dorff, and her performance is easily the best in the movie. It's weird to think of this latter half of the Chucky franchise without her, because she's become so integral to it, but she almost didn't get the part. Before auditioning for Nika, she auditioned audition for the bitchy older sister, which is the kind of role she usually gets. But according to her, what landed her the role of Nika was that out of all of the women that auditioned, she was the only one that Mancini thought was believable as a paraplegic. In the last 20 minutes of the movie, we get the big reveal via flashback that Nika's family had been on Chucky's kill list since moments before his death in the first movie.
Since then, a lot of families have come and gone. The Barclays, the Kincaids, the Tillys.
Kind of feels like Mancini just wanted to write some reason for Chucky to be here killing these people, but this is the 6th movie in a slasher franchise, and it was long overdue for some surprise family connection to the first movie to come up.
Here's a critical thing. If you find yourself dealing with an unexpected backstory and a preponderance of exposition, the past will come back to bite you in the ass. Whatever you think you know about the past, forget it. The past is not at rest. Any sins you think were committed in the past are about to break out and destroy you.
And then the movie ends, like 4 times. It looks like it's going to be over here with this slow push in on Chucky after the cops come, but then there's another scene with Nika in court being blamed for the murders and getting sentenced to an asylum. Then it feels like it's over again with the big Jennifer Tilly cameo where she shows up to kill this guy here. Then it really seems like it's over when we see Chucky hiding his soul in Nika's niece. But after that, there's one more scene, post-credits, and it leaves us with a cliffhanger that makes all of those false endings worth sitting through. That's right, Andy Barclay's back, and this time he's packing heat. It's hard to say how well this movie did financially because it went straight to DVD, but they had $10 million less to work with for this movie than they did for Seed of Chucky, and even that movie only had half the budget of Bride of Chucky, so they didn't have to make much on sales to recoup the budget. Financials aside, it was a critical success, and the fans loved it. So Mancini had the momentum to keep going with the story for the 2017 movie Cult of Chucky. Cult of Chucky picks up basically where the last one left off. No one believes Nika's claims about a killer doll because why the fuck would they, and she's taken to a state psychiatric hospital. This time Andy Barclay is back, and they got the original actor Alex Vincent to play him. Andy's got Chucky's head locked up in his safe, and as you can see, he's had some fun with him.
Sometimes it's nice just hanging out on a Friday night with your best friend.
Seeing the Chucky head that Andy holds onto is such an awesome effect. It kind of reminds me of Chucky's head talking in this behind-the-scenes video for Bride. The new cast of characters in the asylum is interesting enough. There's an old woman who thinks she's a ghost.
Excuse me. Can you see me?
Multiple Malcolm who has different personalities.
I'm Michael.
I'm Mark, by the way.
I'm Charles.
And a woman who, in her guilt for killing her baby, forms an unhealthy attachment to a familiar face. Fiona Dorff kills it again, and whenever she gets a good scene or a great line, she really delivers. The asylum is a cool new location for the series. Sort of feels like a one-shot story like the military academy. The asylum itself has a great washed-out sterile look that crushes the blacks and makes the colors pop, especially the blood. Of course, Chucky shows up because this doctor thinks it's a good idea to trigger his patients with dolls. And Tiffany shows up to drop off her own Chucky doll. This all leads to a really great scene. Chucky found a groovy new spell on voodooForDummies.com and figured out how to essentially clone himself. Seeing multiple Chuckies kill together and joke around is probably the best part in the movie. I can only imagine what Child's Play 3 would have been like if Universal had given them the budget to do this when Mancini first had the idea.
Now I'm gonna go kill Andy. No, I want to kill Andy. I earned it. Hello? Look at my hair. Oh, shit, you win. Absolutely. Sorry, pal. You go fuck them up real good.
Why couldn't the whole movie have been Chucky's working together to kill people like this? It's so good. I mean, I know why. It would have cost too much, but seeing all these little bastards work together for just 10 minutes at the end feels like such a tease. Thankfully, Mancini revisits this in the TV show.
Now, I can be me, and me, and me.
Me too.
Mancini takes it a step further by having Chucky finally inhabit a human body again after 29 long years, and I gotta say, Fiona Dorff plays a great Chucky. Her whole demeanor changed completely, and you really get the sense that there's someone else at the wheel behind those eyes. Oh, and her Chucky laugh is perfect. But I guess that just runs in the family.
I also think that I instinctually have a cackle like him, which maybe you have too. You think you cackle?
Yeah, I can.
We got Dorff's cackle.
I love Bride of Chucky and hold it in high regard as one of the very best in the series, but Seed took the comedy way too far and derailed everything. If the series was going to keep going, they had to get serious again. If anyone had any doubts that Chucky could be scary again after watching Curse of Chucky, then Cult of Chucky should definitely have put them at ease. There's multiple Chuckies running around, Charles Lee Ray has a new body, and Tiffany shows up to round things out. The new gang driving off into the moonlight to cause havoc is such an awesome setup for another movie. Sadly though, United Artists came out of nowhere in 2019 with their reboot of Chucky and kind of killed any momentum for a new movie. Mancini was crushed and felt personally attacked. He said Chucky isn't just his creation, it's his livelihood. So of course he took it personally. 4 years later, Mancini was able to bring Chucky back in a TV series, and Chucky really shines here. Airing on both Sci-Fi and the USA Network, the show has gotten millions of views, and it was the first time critical response has been almost entirely positive since the first movie came out. The story arc of the series is yet another idea Mancini didn't get to earlier in the franchise, and this time he takes us way back to the beginning with Mancini's first draft for the movie, Blood Buddy. Remember how Chucky was going to be a psychological manifestation of Andy's id? In the series, the main character is a young kid who gets picked on by everyone at his school, primarily because he's gay and a bit of an artist. Even his dad, who's this sort of homophobic blue-collar cliché, is totally in denial about his son's sexuality, and he gets really violent whenever it comes up. Things are pretty rough for him. But shortly after he happens upon this retro Chucky doll, the people in his life that torment him start mysteriously dying, and there's a homicide detective piecing together the things that don't quite add up. The long-form format of television gave Mancini a chance to focus more on the characters than he could in a single movie. Like he planned to with the original script, Mancini toys with our assumptions for quite a while in this series. We know who Chucky is. And we know this show is a continuation of the earlier movies because Chucky even mentions them, for better or worse.
You know, I have a queer kid.
You have a kid?
Gender fluid.
But despite us knowing all the backstory, Mancini goes a long way to make us doubt whether or not all this is happening in Jake's head. He has all of his conversations with Chucky when no one else is around, and he's really pissed off at someone, right on the edge of doing something about it.
Take the knife, Jake. You know you want to.
We also get a good look into Chucky's upbringing. There's a series of flashbacks in the first few episodes that kind of feel like Making a Murderer Charles Lee Ray, and it was cool seeing that he was a raging psychopath from the very beginning. The first season concluded in November of 2021, and during promotion for it, Mancini stated that there will be future Chucky movies. With the series having been picked up for another season and the promise of new Chucky movies on the horizon, the franchise is looking stronger than ever. 30 years on, and Chucky is still going strong with no signs of stopping. Chucky remains and always will be one of the most unique and fun to watch icons of slasher cinema.
I'm fucking infamous. I'm one of the most notorious slashers in history, and I don't want to give that up. I am Chucky, the killer doll, and I dig it!